Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're stepping into something a bit different. It's not a planned interview or a polished report.
No, not at all. What we've got is source material from a Twitter space really early in the morning, and it features Hector Lopez, at Hacker So I Hick, a major figure in Latin American cybersecurity.
Right, and he basically just showed up because he couldn't sleep. He wasn't there to give a talk.
Exactly, he was. Well, he sounded deeply anxious, carrying this immense weight about the potential collapse of civil society in Mexico, like total system failure.
So our mission today isn't just to relay the, frankly, terrifying things he said. It's to really unpack that conversation, that raw dialogue. We want to understand the kind of extreme personal stress these ethical hacktivists are under. People whose job is literally exposing weaknesses.
When the lines blur, and organized crime seems to be the state they're trying to analyze or even help fix.
And for you listening, the goal is to see how the flow of this very unfiltered, sleepless conversation reveals the reality. What does this level of fear, the state of free speech, and institutional breakdown actually look like through the eyes of someone who sees the digital cracks and now really fears the physical ones?
Yeah, it's a unique perspective. Let's get into it.
Okay, so let's start with the people involved. Who are we listening to here?
First up, obviously, is Hector Lopez. He's based in Guanajuato, Mexico, and he's arguably one of the most prominent voices in ethical hacking there, maybe in Latin America.
Yeah, very visible. His whole online identity is built around ethical hacking, right? Pen testing, security education.
Right, and digital advocacy. He runs red teams, shows organizations where they're vulnerable so they can defend themselves.
And his reach is significant. Something like, what, 45,000 followers on X? Plus, he's known for sharing resources.
Oh, definitely. Free stuff, Kali Linux courses, guides on navigating the deep web. He's really focused on empowering people, giving them the tools.
But it's not just the technical side. There's a philosophy there, too, this sort of crypto-anarchist label that comes up.
Yeah, and it's important to understand what that means in this context. It's not about, total chaos. It's really a deep commitment to privacy, to decentralization, using strong encryption as tools against corruption and government overreach.
Which sounds pretty necessary if you feel the state itself can't be trusted.
Exactly. He sees these secure, decentralized tools as almost essential for survival in certain environments.
And that ethical stance, the white hat approach, using skills for public awareness, not personal profit, makes him influential, but also, you have to assume, a target.
Absolutely. And his work isn't just local. He's reported on major cyber incidents across borders, like big data breaches in Peru's national identity system, RIANIA. So he has international credibility.
And his organization, OIA. It used to be OMHE, focused just on Mexico.
Correct. OMHE, the Mexican Organization of Ethical Hackers. But late 2023, early 2024, they rebranded, became the Organización Internacional de Hackers y Expertos en Ciberseguridad, broadened the scope to all of Latin America.
Okay, so that international shift feels significant. It wasn't just cosmetic, was it? It seems strategic, especially given who he reached out to that morning.
Definitely strategic. Which brings us to Alberto Daniel Hill. At Ada Daniel Hill on X. He's a well-known Uruguayan hacker and activist.
So why him? Why was that international connection the key for this particular very vulnerable conversation Hector initiated?
Well, think about it. If you're going to talk openly about potentially state-level corruption where cartels might be deeply intertwined with government, you probably don't feel safe relying only on local networks or local platforms.
Right, you need reach, maybe some insulation from immediate pressure within Mexico.
Precisely. Hector needed a network of trust that stretched beyond Mexico's borders. He needed to address threats that are really region-wide.
So connecting with someone like Hill, who's internationally recognized, shares that kind of decentralized worldview that creates a safer space.
It creates a necessary space. They collaborate on investigations, they connect with activists elsewhere, it builds this protected digital sphere. These kinds of highly sensitive anti-corruption talks, they can really only happen effectively where there's deep trust. Trust in the host, the platform, the other participants.
Trust that it's not immediately compromised by the very entities you're discussing.
Exactly. So when Hector felt compelled to share things that were clearly putting him at risk, the stuff keeping him awake at night, he went to Hill. Hill understood the context, shared the critical lens, and importantly, had a platform with reach beyond, let's say, the immediate grasp of Mexican intelligence or cartel monitoring.
It's a trust network built on shared skills, but also shared ideological risk.
Absolutely. International solidarity validation. It was essential for what Héctor needed to say.
Okay, so let's get into the conversation itself. It starts, well, it sounds completely unscripted, very human.
Totally. It kicks off with the usual Twitter space stuff, can you hear me? Mic checks. Alberto points out some audio issues, very informal.
But Hector just cuts through that. He
Yeah.
immediately says, ando bien ansioso. I'm very anxious.
Yeah, straight to the point. But then, interestingly, he tries to distance himself from it slightly. He says the anxiety is not for me.
Like, it's for the country, not his personal safety.
Kind of, like he's trying to maintain this professional observer role,
Yeah.
analyzing the situation. But the emotion just breaks through immediately. He admits he woke up early, couldn't sleep, and it was because of a specific horrifying event.
Which was the trigger for this whole outpouring.
Yes. The murder of a mayor in Uruapan, Michoacan, a city known to be heavily controlled by the La Familia Michoacana cartel.
And this wasn't just random violence, was it? This mayor, he was actively pushing back.
Oh, very actively. He was an opposition figure, openly challenging the cartel's power. He had apparently made public statements saying, if criminals were caught kidnapping or robbing in his area, they'd basically be killed. He was declaring war on their turf.
Wow. So that's not just defiance. It's trying to usurp the cartel's authority.
Exactly. So the assassination wasn't just revenge. It was a calculated message, a demonstration of power. The cartel showing everyone, politicians, police, activists like Héctor, that the criminals can do more. A brutal warning. Don't challenge us.
And the details around how it happened make it even more chilling.
Absolutely. The timing, first off. It happened during the Day of the Dead celebrations, Dia de Muertos.
Which is hugely significant culturally, especially in Michoacan. It's a time of remembrance, community.
Exactly. A time supposed to be sacred, spiritual, and they shattered that. They chose that moment of public gathering and cultural reverence to strike. Maximum psychological impact.
And the execution itself. Hector mentions some truly macabre details.
He did. The mayor was apparently carrying his young son when he was killed.
Oh my God.
Yeah, whether the child was used as a shield or just the sheer brutality of doing it right in front of him during that specific celebration, it signals a level of calculated cruelty that's hard to comprehend.
He was a planned hit, right?
Yeah.
Not a random encounter.
Definitely planned. Hector mentioned multiple sicarios, trained assassins. Reports said 2 were neutralized, but that implies more were involved. An organized ambush. He even compared the cold efficiency and political nature of it to the infamous Colosio assassination back in '94. It showed real operational capacity.
No, Hector's based in Guanajuato. He mentioned thinking of it as relatively safe for a non-narco area. How did this event in Michoacan break through that perception for him?
It seemed to be a tipping point. Seeing such a public, defiant figure taken out so brazenly, so symbolically, it made him realize the crisis wasn't contained. It wasn't just over there. It could reach anyone, anywhere.
It signaled an escalation, a major escalation. He said it proved things in Mexico se va a poner muy cabrona are going to get really, really rough. For someone like him, already working in a risky field, seeing that boundary between, say, digital activism and physical danger just dissolve, that seemed to be what triggered the intense anxiety.
So feeling this intense anxiety, this despair, Hector's immediate reaction was to post about it online. He mentioned using sarcasm.
Yeah, he posted what he called a very strong comment using sarcasm to try and, I guess, process or highlight the absurdity and horror of the situation.
But that didn't go over well.
Not at all. He said he got muchísimo hate, a massive wave of online attacks. People completely missed the sarcastic intent. They accused him of being callous, insensitive, mocking the tragedy. Like, how dare you say stupid things when Mexico lost a hero?
That's the sarcasm trap online, isn't it? Especially in a super polarized environment, nuance just dies.
Totally. And Alberto, listening to Héctor, immediately got it. He said he uses sarcasm himself for situations that are just too ridiculous or awful for straightforward commentary.
He validated Hector's approach.
Yeah, and pointed out how this online toxicidad, this toxicity, gets weaponized. People deliberately twist context to attack the messenger, shut them down.
So for Hector, that probably just reinforced the feeling of isolation. You risk speaking out and you get attacked not just by the bad guys, but by the public misinterpreting you.
Exactly. It highlights how difficult it is to even talk about these things honestly.
And this feeling of systemic failure, it wasn't just online toxicity. He then pointed to failures in actual physical security, right? At the very top.
Yeah, he drew this chilling contrast. Around the same time the mayor was assassinated, the Secretary of Public Security survived an assassination attempt. right in Mexico City, the federal district.
Survived how?
Pure luck, basically, and serious hardware. He was in a specialized Level 3 armored vehicle, the kind that can supposedly stop AK-47 rounds. Massive state protection.
Okay, so level 3 armor for the secretary.
Yeah.
And the mayor in Uruapan.
That's the horrifying part. Héctor said the mayor had specifically asked the president for more National Guard protection, more police resources.
And the request was ignored.
Ignored, denied, left exposed. And then he was executed in that very public, symbolic way.
The implication is devastating. If you're part of the ruling elite, you get state-funded military-grade protection.
But if you're opposition, trying to actually fight crime in your own town, the state might just abandon you, leave you vulnerable.
It suggests protection is selective, a political tool almost, not universal security.
Which leads directly into his critique of the political system itself, particularly the ruling Morena party.
He didn't mince words there, did he? He talked about a democracia falsa, a fake democracy.
Yeah, basically arguing that the whole system is managed behind the scenes by organized crime. He described the current president, Sheinbaum, as sort of downplaying these events, acting like a marionette, a puppet.
A puppet for whom?
For her predecessor, López Obrador, Héctor claimed she owes her position entirely to him.
And his critique of López Obrador, AMLO, was intense.
Extremely sharp, called him corruptissimo, supremely corrupt. Accused him of actively making alliances with cartels to consolidate power.
He also brought up AMLO's son, Andy Beltran.
Yeah, alleging he created phantom companies, shell corporations, just to siphon off public funds. And pointed out that Beltran now leads Morena, the most powerful party, despite apparently lacking a university degree. It paints a picture of deep nepotism.
And the fact that Sheinbaum keeps portraits of AMLO in her office, Héctor saw that as symbolic.
He did, as signaling continuity, that it's still AMLO's rule, essentially.
Right.
An inherited power structure, not one based on a fresh mandate or merit.
This idea of systemic inherited corruption. It connects to the next point he made about institutional theft, this thing called huachicol fiscal.
Right. So huachicol is the everyday term for fuel theft, like tapping Pemex pipelines, common crime.
But adding fiscal, that implies something bigger, state level.
Exactly. Héctor used it to describe industrialized, state-sponsored fuel theft orchestrated from within.
Orchestrated by who?
This is the shocking part. He claimed it's run by high-ranking people inside the Navy and the Army, the very institutions supposed to be protecting Mexico's resources.
Wow. So not just turning a blind eye, but actively participating.
Actively organizing it, according to him, on a massive scale. He mentioned like an entire tanker ship, a buke, full of stolen fuel destined for China.
You can't move a tanker load of stolen oil internationally without high-level complicity. Ports, customs, naval logistics.
Precisely. It implies corruption at the absolute highest levels of the military and the state oil company Pemex. It's not petty crime, it's systemic looting.
And the Pemex ransomware attack, it ties into this.
It does, chillingly. Pemex got hit by ransomware, lost critical records, financial, logistical data. Héctor's group, OIHEC, offered to help. For free. Ethical hacking expertise to recover the data, secure their systems.
And Pemex, or the government, refused.
They refused free help.
Why on earth would they do that? Unless,
as Héctor concluded, they preferred the data to be lost. They didn't want those records recovered.
Because the recovered data would have shown the proof. The evidence of this massive internal theft, the huachicol fiscal.
That was his assessment. That the corruption is so embedded, they'd rather let critical national data vanish than risk having ethical hackers restore it and expose the truth.
That's profoundly cynical, choosing data destruction over transparency.
It speaks volumes about the level of impunity. And that impunity, that reach, it isn't just domestic anymore.
Right. He mentioned the international operations, the attempt on Simon Levy in D.C.
Yeah, an alleged assassination attempt on an opposition ex-deputy taking place in Washington, D.C. It shows the cartels are operating globally now, projecting power far beyond Mexico.
And the official reaction from Mexico. He said they spread fake news.
Attempted to discredit Levy. Put out a story that he was arrested in Portugal for criminal ties, basically attacking the victim instead of acknowledging the cartel's terrifying international capability.
It's a pattern of denial and deflection.
And this power is amplified by this bizarre, terrifying mix he described, high technology and ritualistic practices.
like using drones as bombs.
Yeah, advanced tech like weaponized drones, but simultaneously engaging in what he called narco-satanic rituals, worshiping figures like La Santa Muerte, Malverde.
He even mentioned really disturbing initiation rites, like consuming human flesh. Why bring that up? What's the relevance of these rituals?
It's about psychological warfare, I think, twofold. For the sicarios themselves, it creates this sense of being untouchable, protected by dark forces, making them fearless.
And for everyone else.
Pure terror. It makes the enemy seem almost supernatural, inhuman. How do you fight an enemy that uses drone bombs and practices cannibalistic rituals? It makes them seem unstoppable, and the state utterly powerless against something that operates outside normal human rules.
Okay, so hearing all this, the murder, the corruption, the rituals, the impunity, it circles back to Hector himself, right? To his personal struggle.
Absolutely. The core of his anxiety seemed to be this dilemma. Should he keep speaking out, or should he just shut up?
Retreat into the purely technical side of his work. Cybersecurity consulting, pen testing, stay out of the politics.
Yeah. He admitted he questions it constantly. He knows silence isn't really in his nature, his ethical code, but the risk. It's not theoretical anymore.
He mentioned people close to him being killed.
He did. Associates, even people he'd interviewed for his own shows. The violence is right there in his immediate circle. It's not distant news.
And that fear has real-world consequences for him personally.
Very real. He revealed he now sleeps with weapons nearby. Specifically mentioned a katana, a Japanese sword, and kunai, throwing knives.
It's a cybersecurity expert sleeping with a katana.
Because, as he put it, the cartels saben bien quién soy. They know exactly who I am. That's the transition we have to grasp. The digital expert forced to become a physical defender in his own home.
And this personal danger is happening against a backdrop where seeking justice is almost impossible.
Right. He cited that terrifying statistic about journalism being the most dangerous job in Mexico, and the reason why. Only 1 in 100 homicides ever results in a conviction. 1%.
Think about that. If you expose uncomfortable truths, whether you're a journalist, an activist, an opposition figure,
you can be killed, and there's a 99% chance your killer walks free. It's impunity by design. It makes assassination an efficient tool with minimal consequences.
and he connected this impunity back to the political structure, this nepotism, tráfico de influencias.
Yeah, influence peddling. He described it as a king system where power is basically passed down or handed out to family and loyalists. Again, citing AMLO's son leading the party without, the usual qualifications. Merit doesn't matter as much as connections.
It reinforces that cynical phrase he mentioned, el que no tranza no avanza. If you don't cheat the system, make dirty deals, you don't get ahead.
It paints corruption not as a flaw in the system, but as the system's operating principle.
Facing this total system failure, Hector actually proposed a pretty drastic solution in the conversation.
He did. He argued for declaring a full state of emergency and, controversially, accepting past offers, like from Trump, for U.S. intervention.
U.S. military help against the cartels, treating them like terrorist organizations.
Essentially, yes. He saw it as maybe the only way to perform a kind of surgical strike against the corruption that's metastasized within Mexico's own military and political structures. A last resort to stop the bleeding.
But Alberto pushed back on that, didn't he?
He did. Alberto, with his broader international perspective, argued that declaring a state of emergency and inviting U.S. forces in wouldn't solve it. It would likely just escalate the violence massively.
How so?
He warned the cartels would react with 10 times more power. They're heavily armed, technologically sophisticated now with those drones, and deeply embedded. A foreign intervention could trigger all-out urban warfare.
So it's a potential catastrophe either way. Slow collapse versus immediate, possibly worse, escalation.
That seems to be the horrific bind. Alberto's point was that any overt, large-scale military action would inevitably lead to huge civilian suffering and probably wouldn't root out an enemy that's already inside the gates, so to speak.
It's that feedback loop again. Trying to fix it forcefully might just make the explosion bigger.
And acknowledging that terrible reality that the state might be too compromised to even declare an emergency effectively seemed to be where Hector's energy just drained.
How did he wrap up the conversation?
On a note of exhaustion, really. He thanked Alberto for giving him the space to vent, saying it did help ease some of that intense anxiety.
But his final thought was pretty bleak.
Very bleak. He concluded that Mexicans aren't really viviendo living anymore. They're just sobreviviendo, surviving. Existence reduced to endurance.
Did he say he would stop speaking out?
He said he'd be more cautious, more careful about what he posts, who he tags online, acknowledging the direct threat, but he refused to be totally silenced. He emphasized that his work, the ethical drive, the will of the people that can't be completely extinguished, even if it means facing this reality armed in his own home, the fight shifts to survival, but it continues. Hashtag tag outro. So, pulling back from that intense, raw conversation, what are the key takeaways here? We saw some really dark but crucial knowledge nuggets surface.
Yeah, I mean, first, that Pemex story. A government allegedly rejecting free expert helped to recover from a massive ransomware attack.
Because the truth hidden in that data, the evidence of high-level institutional corruption, the Huachcal fiscal was apparently more dangerous to them than losing the data itself. That's chilling.
Then there's the evolution of cartel power. It's not just violence anymore. It's sophisticated political assassinations timed for maximum psychological impact. High-tech weapons like drone bombs.
Mixed with this primal ritualistic element, the narco-satanic practices, it creates this aura of almost invincible, terrifying power.
And underlying it all, this confirmation of how political power seems to work there. Less about merit or about nepotism, inheritance, el que no tranza no avanza, corruption is the entry fee.
Which leaves honest people, activists, journalists, completely exposed and unprotected.
And for you, listening, this deep dive really underscores the visceral, physical cost of information activism in such environments. It's not just about code or data leaks, it's about real danger. It explains why someone like Héctor, a top ethical hacker dedicated to fixing systems,
is now seriously contemplating needing refugee status, having to potentially flee his own country because his work makes him a target.
and which brings us to our final provocative thought for you to consider.
If the state itself, through its actions like refusing help with Pemex, or the alleged military complicity in fuel theft, shows it prioritizes hiding corruption over fighting crime, then how can technology alone, or education, or even democratic activism ever truly dismantle an enemy that seems to have already infiltrated the state's highest levels?
Hector's agonizing choice, that shift from digital warrior to sleeping with a sword, it forces us to ask, is abandoning the fight the only path left for those trying to do honest work in such a compromised system? Something to think about?
Welcome to the debate. Our discussion today, it centers on a truly raw and quite intimate exchange, one that wasn't planned, really, but seems spurred by desperation. It involves Héctor Lopez, who's a recognized ethical hacker and cybersecurity educator. He woke up very early, gripped by insomnia and anxiety, and basically joined a trusted colleague's Twitter space just to vent his overwhelming fear concerning Mexico's deep systemic political and criminal crisis.
Yeah, and the situation Héctor described is, it's one of catastrophic collapse. You have the recent murder of the Uruapan mayor right there in a public setting holding his son, the Secretary of Public Security escaping an assassination attempt in the federal district, and this pervasive awareness that colleagues, people he knows, have already paid the ultimate price. So the central kind of agonizing question that comes out of this source material is this: does active public dissent, this continuous exposure of corruption by non-political figures, people like Héctor, does that constitute a necessary moral duty to, prevent total societal collapse? Or is it ultimately a futile, self-endangering act, given the overwhelming systemic power structure he details?
Right. And I'll be arguing that speaking out, even fueled by this very real anxiety, is essential. It's essential to maintain even a shred of civic integrity, and that the very act of resistance, even at profound personal risk, is maybe the only defense against total complicity.
I come at it from a different angle. I'm going to argue that given the overwhelming systemic capture of institutions by organized crime, the astronomical personal risk involved in dissent just far outweighs any capacity to affect substantive practical change. The system is simply too robustly organized, too entrenched for individual resistance to matter beyond, frankly, creating a target.
Well, I think the material clearly shows that silence is actually enabling this corruption. Héctor's sleeplessness, his anxiety, it's a direct response to a reality where the state's capacity for enforcement, for protection, has just vanished. We see definitive proof of institutional compromise. The public murder of the Uruapan mayor,
that was designed to send a lethal message to any opposition, political or otherwise. Yet, despite facing this, existential dread to the point where he apparently sleeps with a katana and is actively thinking about seeking refugee status in the U.S., Héctor continues his work. As the founder of OIX, his organization provides ethical hacking megapacks, free resources, and exposes critical vulnerabilities in state systems. And the key insight here for me is the government's response to this kind of action. When Pemex suffered that major ransomware attack, the government flat out refused OIX's free expert assistance. They chose concealment over competence. Now why?
To hide the what you call fiscal.
Exactly. To hide evidence of what you call fiscal, this massive state-backed theft and trafficking of stolen gasoline, often directly involving the military. That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. The fact that they prefer silence proves that dissent still holds power. If it were truly feudal, the corrupt state wouldn't have to prioritize silencing it, right? They wouldn't care.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. Because the evidence points not just to corruption, but to complete state failure. A state where crime is not just organized, as Héctor put it, but well organized, operating with multiple contingencies, layers of protection for every act of violence. The entire environment seems engineered to crush any sense of heroism or effective resistance. When a courageous political figure like that Uruapan mayor is killed so brazenly, the message broadcast to any non-political figure with agallas, guts, is unambiguous. Resistance is fatal. And furthermore, the statistics he shared are damning. Only 1 out of 100 homicides leads to a conviction. That reflects a structural impunity designed specifically to protect criminals and intimidate citizens. So when Héctor details the sheer emotional toll, the insomnia, the katana, the preparations to flee, the fact that colleagues have been killed, it forces us to ask, where does moral duty end and basic self-preservation have to begin? When a state is so thoroughly corrupted that it ignores a request for help from a besieged mayor and protects its own criminals, individual protest is merely a target. It's tragically self-sacrificial without a corresponding gain.
Okay, but let's try and focus on the distinction maybe between practical safety and psychological or even moral integrity. I see why you emphasize the personal cost. It's undeniable. But I would frame Héctor's decision to vent his profound anxiety in that public space differently. The purpose of activism here isn't necessarily about immediate political victory, winning an election or something. It's about shifting consciousness, maintaining a kind of moral firewall. He spoke openly, apparently, about receiving heavy criticism and hate for using sarcasm when discussing these tragic events, like a sort of flippant, almost dismissive tone about the mayor's death, which he defended, saying it was a necessary psychological tool to process the sheer absurdity of a country where tragedy has become routine. He consciously chooses to repost and disseminate notes from credible journalists like Luis Chabarro.
This constant, sometimes sardonic resistance actively counters the government's systematic minimization efforts. President Xinbang apparently looking demacerated, but spending hours daily claiming Mexico is perfect. This act of maintaining memory and dignity, even when terrified, is the bare minimum required, perhaps, to stop total societal collapse into just acceptance.
That sarcasm, though, is exactly what worries me. It sounds less like a viable strategy for change and more like a defense mechanism against a reality that has, frankly, already beaten him down. You mentioned shifting consciousness, but how exactly does shifting consciousness protect Héctor from an enemy with, as he pointed out, transnational reach? He himself referenced the cartel's attempted attack on an opposer in Washington, D.C. That incident proves the cartels have effectively zero geographical limits. Furthermore, and this is critical, he admitted that if a close journalist, someone he relies on, is killed, he would likely stop speaking out. That admission of vulnerability, born of raw, understandable fear, is the honest human measure of futility here. We're debating moral imperative versus the astronomical likelihood of death.
In a culture where corruption is so deeply ingrained that el que no tranza no avanza, if you don't cheat, you don't advance, is essentially a national proverb, intellectual or digital resistance just isn't a match for brute physical violence and deep structural complicity.
That's a compelling point about the limits.
But if you considered the function of parallel structures, especially when the state itself actively criminalizes its own operations, OIHEC's work exposing vulnerabilities, sharing free tools, building a community, it functions as a necessary parallel structure precisely because the official state systems haven't just failed, they've arguably become instruments of crime themselves. OIHEC is performing the accountability function the government refuses to embrace. We really need to underscore the depth of this infiltration. The state, through elements of its military, is complicit in massive fraud like Huachicol Fiscal. This refusal to accept free help after the Pemex hack, thereby protecting evidence of that theft, confirms that the state, at certain levels, has been captured.
So, accountability through decentralized technological exposure, like publishing leaks from entities like RENIAC and INE, which hold crucial personal data, it might be the only way to exert external pressure when the state itself is functionally a primary criminal organization.
I just find the reliance on technological exposure optimistic, maybe to the point of being dangerous in this context. It seems insufficient against the sheer physical force and, frankly, the advanced capabilities possessed by these criminal organizations. Héctor's own evidence kind of debunks the idea that digital exposure offers real protection. He recounted how the security chief's armored vehicle, designed to resist an AK-47, only barely saved his life from an attack right in the Capitol. The narcos possess advanced, often superior technology. We're seeing weaponized drones used as bombs, sophisticated chemistry labs churning out synthetic drugs. You're essentially suggesting fighting a heavily armed, exponentially powerful force. Héctor noted, if the government sends 10 soldiers, the sicarios respond with 20. With, what, ethical guidelines and open-source software? And this leads directly into a really profound challenge to your argument for continuous dissent. Technology fundamentally fails when the rules of the game include not just high-tech weaponry, but also occult rituals and deep-seated state complicity. When you're fighting an enemy that operates outside all norms, one that uses advanced weaponry alongside beliefs in Santa Muerte and Malverde, and is described as engaging in, narco-satanic practices, the struggle fundamentally changes. You aren't just fighting a conventional military or a corrupt political adversary, you're fighting a force that feels, as Héctor himself put it, not of this world. Which kind of makes ethical hacking seem like a very ineffective defense against raw terror and overwhelming physical force.
Okay, perhaps we need to define the failure more precisely then, because we're not just debating corruption, are we? We're discussing the solidification of what looks like a hereditary, almost pseudo-monarchical system. Héctor mentioned López Obrador effectively passing power to Sheinbaum and his son, Andy Beltran, allegedly running shadow operations without even a university degree. This points towards a systemic capture where power and wealth are inherited, reinforced by organized crime, and lacking any semblance of democratic accountability at the time. Héctor explicitly stated his profound fear that Mexico will be known as Narcos Mexico forever. That emotional statement, that fear of an eternal label, a total cultural loss, doesn't that itself argue against futility? Isn't preventing that the very reason to keep pushing back, however small the action?
Or does that fear, that sense of permanence, actually justify the position that individual actions are just drops of clean water being poured into an already poisoned well? The fear of that eternal label might stem from recognizing the sheer, overwhelming scale of the problem, suggesting the battle is already lost at the individual level.
While I deeply acknowledge the catastrophic nature of what Héctor described and that genuine fear of a permanent narco state, I think a distinction must be made between resignation and survival. Héctor notes the tragic reality. In Mexico, we survive. We no longer live. The act of continuing to speak, even with insomnia and intense anxiety, that becomes the bare minimum required to maintain a shred of dignity, of civic life. By speaking out, by exposing, by building IOHEC, he is actively rejecting that pressure to just go with the flow, become corrupt, and allow the criminal structure to operate in the dark with absolute impunity. The integrity of the individual standing against the corruption of the system, maybe that is the final stand. So, for me, the discussion itself
born from this raw anxiety, insomnia, and the very real threat of death, ultimately proves the agonizing necessity of continued resistance. The fight, as Hector wages it, isn't necessarily for immediate political victory, but for integrity, for ensuring that the criminal state is not afforded the comfort, the ease of silence. This decentralized resistance, whether it's digital or educational, it maintains that critical potential, however slim, for future structural change.
But we have to remain grounded in the harsh reality of the system he is actually facing. The evidence strongly suggests the situation requires nothing less than a declaration of a state of emergency. Drastic structural reforms, things which the current compromised power structure is highly motivated to prevent. The emotional and physical costs of dissent, especially given that horrifying impunity rate of 1 conviction per 100 homicides, may simply be too high for the limited practical impact it seems to achieve in a system already controlled by those who operate with, as Hector implied, godlike power and absolutely zero boundaries.
We are left then reflecting on the truly tragic position of engaged citizens like Héctor Lopez, people who must constantly weigh their moral obligation to truth and accountability against the immediate lethal threat to their lives and the lives of their families. The ultimate viability of activism in such a deeply compromised environment, well, it remains an open and profoundly disturbing question, one this source material really forces us to confront with utmost seriousness.
Okay, so we're looking at this transcript. An early morning conversation, really raw, between Héctor Lopez and Alberto Daniel Hill.
Yeah, really intense stuff about the security crisis, the corruption in Mexico, assassinations, state capture. It's heavy.
Definitely. And our job today is to figure out how to shape this really emotional warning to give it the most impact.
Right, maximizes power.
What jumped out at me first was just, wow, the sheer amount of high-stakes information. You can feel Héctor's urgency, that feeling of México se está desmoronando, the country crumbling.
Totally. It's almost overwhelming. And I think that's our starting point, isn't it? Taking that raw, almost frantic energy.
Yeah?
And channeling it. Making sure the structure matches the gravity of what he's saying.
So the structure, that's where the biggest opportunity is, I think. Transforming this anxiety into a really structured warning, prioritizing the most alarming parts, the geopolitical stuff.
I agree. We need that escalation. But are we worried about losing some of that raw, immediate fear? I mean, his personal state, that anxiety, that's what makes it feel so real, right?
That's a fair point. It's a balance. But right now, the weakness is that lack of clear escalation. It's very stream of consciousness, like someone who couldn't sleep would talk.
Understandable, given the circumstances.
For sure. But it means things like his personal feelings about hate comments sit right next to these huge, globally significant alarms.
And that mixing just kind of dilutes the big claims?
Exactly. It dilutes the intensity. So to make it really persuasive, the suggestion is to reorder things, either in the conversation itself, if possible, or in any documentation that comes out of it.
Build up the tension?
Yeah. Build a clear progression. Show impunity escalating. Put the most audacious examples, the most shocking displays of cartel power, right at the climax.
Okay, so we're guiding the listener, taking them from maybe an internal tragedy they can connect with, like Hector's fear, all the way up to an international crisis that affects everyone.
Precisely. So a suggestion for the flow could be sequential. Start with violence inside Mexico.
Okay.
Then move to crime that's actively enabled by the state. And then, finally, hit them with the operations outside Mexico's borders, extraterritorial stuff.
We can make that super concrete, like start local. The Uruapan mayor's murder. The attack on the security secretary. That sets the scene, the immediate danger, the source of Hector's anxiety.
Establishes the national risk right away. Then you pivot.
Pivot to the systemic stuff, the huachicol fiscal.
Exactly. And when talking about that, be really explicit about the scale. We're talking buques, massive state-controlled ships.
Navy ships, yeah.
Used to ship stolen gasoline, apparently all the way to China.
Detailing that military, that Navy involvement proves this isn't just some low-level graft. It's deep, systemic.
That scale becomes the bridge, then, to the climax.
Right, which has to be the sheer reach, the attempt to silence Simon Levy.
In Washington, D.C.
In the U.S. Capitol.
Ending on that, the boldness of trying an assassination, basically, in D.C. That drives home that these cartels, they don't respect borders. They're an international threat now.
Okay, so that progression, local tragedy, state-level corruption involving the military, and then global reach. That takes the raw fear and shapes it into this really targeted building warning. I like that.
Okay, so we've got the structure. Now what about the core message? The political takeaway? The audience needs to grasp what this means.
Yeah, the so what question. We need to make it crystal clear what kind of corruption we're talking about. It's not just, politicians being greedy. It's something else.
It's differentiating between standard high-level crime, which is bad enough, and full-on state capture.
Problems and a government being effectively run by the criminals, like a hostile takeover.
Héctor definitely conveys that feeling, the desmoronando, the crumbling. But sometimes the sheer number of examples, all the details, they might actually obscure that central thesis.
The main point gets a bit lost in the weeds.
Could be. The weakness is that a listener might just hear a long list of terrible things, institutional failures, bad actors.
Instead of understanding it as a complete political collapse, a capture.
Exactly. So the suggestion is to explicitly frame the whole discussion around that. This isn't just crime, it's political failure demonstrating capture.
And we can use the evidence he provides to make that framing really strong, like using contrasts.
What kind of contrasts?
Well, a powerful suggestion is to contrast the government's failure to provide basic protection with its success in facilitating massive criminal enterprises.
Ah, I see that on the transcript. Héctor mentions the Uruapan mayor asking for National Guard help.
And getting nothing. The president didn't respond, basically, and the mayor ends up dead. That's a failure to protect, right? Shows a lack of will or maybe capacity.
Okay, so contrast that.
Contrast that failure, that inaction, with the incredible organization and high-level military and political coordination needed for the Huachico Fiscal.
Stealing massive amounts of fuel, using Navy resources, shipping it overseas?
Right. They can't or won't protect a mayor asking for help, but they can deploy state assets for this enormous theft operation. That juxtaposition, side by side, is pretty damning proof of capture, isn't it?
It really is, and we shouldn't forget the symbols he pointed out too, the visual stuff.
Like the current president keeping Lopez Obrador's photos in her office?
Yeah, that detail. It just screams inherited corruption, puppet governance. It's potent.
So use that detail. Maybe bring it in right before diving into the Huachical finances. It reinforces Héctor's comment about, we are not in the monarchy anymore.
Mm-hmm. Only to show that, well, effectively they kind of are. That symbolism really hammers home the idea that the political system itself is just a facade, right? Managed for ongoing exploitation.
It's powerful imagery. Okay, this is really heavy stuff we're dissecting. And thinking about Héctor waking up terrified, sending this in, how does he cope? How does someone documenting this hostile takeover deal with it? Let's shift to that emotional core.
Yeah, the emotion is key. That rawness, the insomnia, the fear. It conveys the urgency so well. It's authentic. You can't fake that.
No, you can't. But there's a risk, right? Constantly returning to the personal despair, the hopelessness. It could end up feeling futile, like his own struggle, wondering if it's just better just survive.
My worry, too. If the focus stays too much on his personal anxiety, does it leave the listener feeling just helpless instead of maybe, I don't know, motivated or warned in a useful way? We need to give the listener, and maybe Héctor himself, a sense of purpose within this mess.
So the suggestion here is about framing. Frame the role of the ethical hacker, the educator, the documenter, not just as a victim reacting to fear, but as someone engaging in a vital, high-risk act of resistance.
Resistance through documentation?
Exactly. A commitment to getting the truth out, despite the danger, because of the danger.
We should lean into Héctor's own words here, that powerful line. For me, honestly, it is the character. For me to be silent, if I am silent, I will die.
Yes. Turn that internal necessity into a kind of rhetorical mission statement for the audience, too. Speaking out, documenting. It's not just about exposing crime. It's about survival. His survival, maybe the country's survival.
And we can tie that personal commitment to a concrete example he gave, the Pimex ransomware attack.
Right, where his organization, OIHEC, offered to help the government for free.
And they were refused. Why?
Because the authorities wanted to hide the corruption, hide the theft that the hack was probably related to. That's the perfect example to land on. It shows the power dynamic. The state tries to cover up, the ethical hacker, the citizen, resists through exposure. Their power lies in revealing the documented truth.
They tried to hide the theft by burying the hack details. Héctor's role then becomes ensuring that truth, that documentation, gets out. It shifts the narrative from just anxiety to principled, necessary defiance.
From fear to action. Okay, that feels like a much stronger way to handle the emotional core.
So, wrapping up, this conversation, it's incredibly powerful. A real sense of national emergency, escalating violence, corruption baked into the military and political system.
And that chilling idea that freedom of speech has become fear of speech in Mexico.
It's explosive material, definitely. But it needs that refinement, that structure to really hit hard.
So, the actionable steps we discussed. First, restructure the narrative. Build that clear climax of impunity, ending with the international reach, the shocker in D.C.
Second, explicitly define the problem as state capture. Use those strong contrasts, failure to protect versus enabling massive theft, and the political symbols like the photos to really nail that thesis.
And third, harness that raw emotion. Frame the act of documenting, the ethical hacker's role, as essential resistance. Turn the personal fear into a public act of defiance, using Héctor's own words and the Pemex example.
Right. We encourage you to take all this powerful information, organize it into that structured warning, and definitely send the revised material back for another look.
Yeah, we'd be very interested to see how it shapes up.
This is the brief on Mexico's escalating security crisis, driven by organized crime and just deep governmental infiltration. So what we're looking at here is this really raw late-night chat. You've got Héctor López. He's this well-known Mexican ethical hacker, right? Couldn't sleep, just full of anxiety, finds activist Alberto Daniel Hill doing a Twitter space and just lets it all out. He paints this picture of a total security breakdown in Mexico and how deep the rot goes, with organized crime basically embedded in the government. It's intense. Okay, let's get into the main points here. First off, the trigger for this latest wave of fear? An incredibly brazen assassination. We're talking about an opposition mayor in Uruapan, Michoacan, killed during a Day of the Dead event, holding his own son. I mean, talk about sending a message. The cartels are showing just how ruthless and powerful they are. Second, this whole thing just throws a harsh light on massive government failures. Get this. The mayor had apparently begged President Sheinbaum for more National Guard protection, but nothing. Requests ignored. And in the same week, Mexico City's security chief barely escapes an assassination attempt, saved only because his vehicle was basically military-grade armor. Wild. Finally, López really hammered home this overwhelming feeling of helplessness, and the personal risk. The cartel's reach is staggering. They even tried to silence critics like Simone Levy, way over in Washington, D.C. Plus, you have this massive corruption, like huge-scale fuel theft, allegedly run by the Mexican military itself. So what you're left with is this terrifying reality. Corruption is just how things work, and speaking out against it could literally get you killed, in a country seemingly run by criminals.